is the production side of asthma art. The reason why I'm talking about it is because traditionally, well up into the 80s, the 1980s, people writing about it would say this is where the meaning of the object is associated. So what is the meaning of this asthma shield? It's a shield used in headhunting expeditions. It has meanings associated with the carvings that are placed on it, so each motif will have a specific meaning associated with it, etc. And those meanings, in effect, were put in there through the making, through the production of that shield. That's what makes it meaningful. But what happened, in fact, with these shields is that a lot of them were being taken from the late 19th century, 20th century onwards during the colonial period, were taken out of their original context by missionaries, explorers, colonial administrators. People that were living in New Guinea were fascinated by it and took it back home with them to the Netherlands, particularly, also to Germany, England, America, Western Europe. And throughout that process, the meaning of that shield changed. People may have taken it with them as a souvenir. Sometimes, you may be a colonial administrator, lived in New Guinea for 15 years and kind of thought, I'll take a souvenir back home. Reminds me of the old days in New Guinea. They may have taken it for that reason. They may have taken it for a personal reason. They may have taken it for other reasons as well. Some of these shields were taken away by missionaries because they were seen to be pagan and representing things that were not Christian, etc. So a lot of these shields were in fact destroyed for that reason as well, and the masks, etc. Some of them are taken away for scientific reasons. Anthropologists particularly encouraged missionaries and administrators to take these objects back home, to put them in museums, like the Pitt Rivers Museum, for instance, where they would be studied and they would become part of the study of human development and human culture, and they would exemplify what stage, for instance, in the social evolutionist schema, this particular society belonged in, etc., etc. So they became museum objects. So there are different reasons why people would be taking the shields away, but throughout that process, the shield became meaningful in itself as well. So as a tourist item, for instance, as a souvenir, it will have a specific meaning to one specific individual. So the old colonial administrator, sitting in his home back in The Hague maybe in 1940, might be looking at the shield and thinking, oh, when I was there 50 years ago, that reminds me of this person or that activity or that thing that happened, etc. So it has a meaning that goes beyond the meanings that have been put in by the makers. It has a meaning that it kind of acquires through being consumed, if you like, by, in this case, the colonial administrator who takes it home as a souvenir. So the interesting thing then is that this idea actually has become very widespread in a lot of fields of study. Anthropology, material culture studies, which I spoke about earlier, is a field that really is kind of built up around this idea. The idea that objects, material culture, is produced, but it is also consumed at the same time. And throughout that process it acquires meaning and becomes important to people. And that importance can be very high, and it can go down again, and it can go up again, and it can go down again. So in a sense, it is socially constructed. The meaning is not inherent to the building or to the object. That meaning is given, that meaning by human beings through human agency, in a sense. So something can acquire meaning, but it can also lose meaning. Meanings can diminish or can change. Now, even though that is quite widely accepted nowadays in, as I said, anthropology, archaeology, material culture study, cultural studies, all these kind of social, cultural fields of study, architecture is kind of lacking behind a bit by its own admission as well, but also by other disciplines have noted. Because up until today, the tendencies in architecture still tends to be to look at this production side of things. So looking at famous architects, or the ways in which buildings are designed, the materials that are used, the forms that we kind of are interested in, and the kind of buildings that result from this, and kind of the kind of new type of buildings that we can create through our new technologies and a different use of materials and kind of new ideas about how to design a building. Architecture remains kind of preoccupied with the production phase of architecture, and that's understandable because after all that's what architects do. I think it is slowly changing. It's not just architecture, in fact it's all the design disciplines, you know, industrial design and all the kind of product design kind of things, all very much focused on the idea that the production stage is the important one, and that is where a building in this case acquires its meaning, and that's the original meaning that was intended by the designer. So, you know, that's why we have a lot of writing about buildings such as these and kind of detailed descriptions. You know, if you read the RBA journal every month, you know, there's new buildings and detailed explorations of why that door was done in that particular way, why that material was used to create that little step up there, etc. Very detailed analysis of all that. And that is then seen to be what the building is about. That's the meaning of that building. And after that, in fact, most architects tend to tend to walk away from it, really. You know, they kind of have seen it. They kind of, you know, the building is done. And a lot of architects, in fact, would say, well, I try never to go back to a building that I designed because I can't stand to see what has happened to it, what they will have done to it. So that shows you that, A, there is that interest mainly in the building side of things, which is understandable. But B, there's also the notion that that's when actually the building acquires its true meaning. So for a building to be used properly, and architects do talk about that sometimes, you know, that proper meaning is given to that building throughout its design process. So the building is produced, yes, it's designed, yes, it's created, it's constructed, it's been given meaning throughout it, it acquires a value, a financial value, but also a cultural value. But it continues to do that after the architect has left. You know, once the owners come in and they inhabit it, they change it, they put things up, they put things down, they make a mess of it sometimes, or they make it look better than it ever was. They abandon it, it falls down, it gets restored again, it gets put on a heritage list. Now all these things can happen to a building for various different reasons, and all these processes come with different meanings for different people, and they can be contested. Some people, as I said, would love it if it was knocked down tomorrow. Other people would hate it, would feel they've lost a landmark, would have lost something of their history and their identity. So all these things happen. So different people, different values, contests, but all of it is meaningful. So what this architect here said, back in the early 20th century, all buildings decay from the day they are finished. It kind of represents an attitude in the architectural profession that I have to say is still around, really, when I talk to architects. All buildings don't necessarily decay from the way they are finished. They might decay from the perspective of the architect, because he can see that people are doing things to the building that he doesn't like. But to phrase it in terms of decay is actually a very negative kind of way of looking at it, of course. All buildings develop, you know, they evolve, they kind of acquire different meanings. And some of them might decay, some of them in fact might blossom, you know, from the day they are finished. And it's in any way difficult to say when a building is finished after all.